In Bhutan, there are no slaughterhouses. The law does not require this. Belief does. Most of the meat sold in Bhutanese markets is trucked in across the border from India because the taking of a life sits badly with the Buddhism this country was built on. On certain holy days each month, the butcher's stalls close entirely. Fishing is restricted almost everywhere, and since 2003, mountaineering has been banned outright, not for safety, but because the summits are understood to be occupied by gods who would prefer not to be stepped on. The national sport of Bhutan is archery, not a memory of archery, not a heritage display arranged for visitors. Every village in the country has a field for it. Astrologers are consulted to find auspicious dates for matches. Offices empty, and the game itself is this. 2 teams, 13 men each. Steel-tipped arrows fired at a wooden plank 30 centimetres wide and 60 centimetres tall, from 145 meters away. That is more than twice the Olympic distance, at a target roughly the size of a laptop screen. At that range, the archer cannot reliably see where his own arrow lands. So his teammates walk down the field and stand beside the target. Not behind a wall, beside it. They watch the arrow arrive, they read where it strikes the wood, and they shout the result back up the field. While this is happening, the opposing team is singing. The songs are composed to unsettle the man drawing the bow. They are about the shape of his forehead, the poor condition of his beard, the certainty that he is going to miss. One traditional verse tells an archer that his brow bulges like a ladle for pouring wine, and that his arrow will wander off into the air and never once find the mark. Both of these things are Bhutan, the country that will not kill a fish, and the country that has arranged its year around a weapon. The men who believe a mountain is a god, and the men who walk into the flight path of an arrow so that a friend can aim more accurately. Nobody here finds this strange, which raises a smaller question than it first appears. What is it exactly that this country has decided to protect? Bhutan calls itself Druk Yul, the land of the thunder dragon. It is small, 38,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of Switzerland, with fewer than 800,000 people living in it. It is wedged between the 2 largest nations on Earth, India below, Tibet above, and it has spent 4 centuries working out how to be neither. Almost all of it is vertical. The land rises from 100 meters above sea level in the southern jungle to 7,500 meters at the northern ice, and it does this in the space of about 170 kilometers. There is very little flat ground in Bhutan. What flat ground exists tends to matter, which is part of why archery took hold here and never let go. A tournament is not an afternoon. It can run for days. The men wear the go, the knee-length robe with the enormous white cuffs, hitched up and belted at the waist. Each time an archer hits the plank, he is given a colored sash, and he tucks it into his belt. By the end of a long match, the best shooters are carrying a fistful of them, hanging down like ribbons on a horse. Ara is passed around, the local grain spirit, distilled at home, warm. Many archers will tell you without embarrassment that they shoot better after a drink. Whole families come to watch. Women stand along the edge of the field as dancers and singers, and their job is partly to encourage their own team, and mostly to dismantle the other one. And then somebody draws, and the field goes quiet, and an arrow travels 145 meters toward a piece of wood and a small group of men standing next to it. This is what a country looks like when it decides what to keep. Because almost everything about Bhutan that seems ancient is in fact a decision made by particular people on particular dates, some of them very recent. And to understand the arrow, you have to start where everyone starts, at the only door. Almost everyone who comes to Bhutan arrives in the same place. The Valley of Paro at 2,200 meters, with mountains on both sides and a river running down the middle of it. There is one international airport in the country, and it sits on the valley floor. The runway is short. The approach is not. To land at Paro, an aircraft must descend between mountains that rise several thousand meters above the wingtips, following the shape of the valley rather than a straight line. There is no instrument approach that can fly it for you. The final turns are made by hand, by eye, close enough to the slopes that passengers can see farmhouses and prayer flags out of the window. The aircraft banks, straightens, and touches down almost immediately afterward. Only a small number of pilots in the world are certified to do it. The figure is usually given as fewer than 50. Flights operate in daylight only, and only in good visibility, because there is no margin for anything else. This is the first thing Bhutan tells you about itself, and it tells you before you have set foot on the ground. Getting in is conditional. It always has been. Above the valley, on the face of a granite cliff 900 meters up, there is a building that has no business being there. Taksang, the tiger's nest. It is a monastery built onto a ledge so narrow that the structure appears to be growing out of the rock rather than standing on it. There is no road. There has never been a road. Everything that has ever gone into that building, every beam, every roof tile, every sack of plaster, every statue, was carried up on the backs of men and mules along a path that climbs steeply through blue pine forest for 2 hours. The story attached to the site is the founding story of Buddhism in Bhutan. In the 8th century, the master Padmasambhava, known here as Guru Rinpoche, is said to have flown to this cliff on the back of a tigress and to have meditated in a cave in the rock face for 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days, and 3 hours. The cave is still there, inside the building. It is the reason the building exists. The monastery around it was constructed in 1692, more than 900 years later. Bhutanese pilgrims have been walking up to it ever since. In April 1998, it caught fire. The main structure burned. Sacred paintings, statues, and manuscripts were destroyed. A monk died. The building that had stood on the ledge for 3 centuries was reduced in a matter of hours to blackened stone and ash on the most photographed cliff face in the Himalaya. Bhutan rebuilt it. Not a replica in modern materials, the same techniques, the same proportions, the same rammed earth and timber joinery carried up the same path on the same backs. It took years and a very large share of the national budget for a country of this size. When it was finished, the monastery looked the way it had looked before, because that was the point. There is a particular kind of decision buried in that. A poor country with limited roads and limited money, spending a fortune to put a building back on a cliff that cannot be reached by vehicle for reasons that are entirely spiritual and not at all practical. Bhutan does this a lot, and the question that follows you around this country is how a place that keeps making choices like that has survived at all, when the neighbors, who once looked exactly like it, have not. Below the cliff, in a stand of forest on the edge of the capital, there is an animal that looks like a mistake. The takin has the body of a cow, the horns of a wildebeest, the face of a moose, and a coat of oily golden hair that sheds water like a raincoat. It stands nearly 2 meters at the shoulder and weighs as much as a small car. It lives in bamboo thickets between 2,000 and 4,000 meters, moving up the slopes in summer and down in winter, and it is one of the strangest large mammals in Asia. The Bhutanese explanation for the takin is better than the biological one. The story concerns Drukpa Kunle, a 15th century monk remembered here as the divine madman, a wandering, drunken, deliberately outrageous teacher who is still one of the most beloved figures in the country. Asked by a crowd to perform a miracle, he demanded a whole cow and a whole goat for lunch, ate both, and then set the goat's head on the cow's skeleton and told it to get up. It got up. It walked away into the mountains, and it has been there ever since. Bhutan made the takin its national animal in 1985. There is a preserve for a herd of them on a hillside above Thimphu, in the trees, 10 minutes from the government ministries. People go and look at them the way people elsewhere go and look at a monument. Thimphu itself is a capital city that does not entirely behave like one. It has around 114,000 people, which makes it one of the smallest capitals in Asia. It sits in a narrow valley at 2,300 meters, and it has grown up the sides of that valley because there is nowhere else for it to go. Every building in the city, by law, carries traditional Bhutanese elements: the painted window frames, the sloping timber cornices, the whitewash. A concrete office block in Thimphu still has to wear the country's face. And there is no traffic light in it. There was one, briefly. It was installed at the main junction in the center of town, and the public reaction was strong enough that it was removed within days. People found it cold. The junction went back to what it had before: a policeman standing on a small circular platform under a canopy in white gloves, directing traffic with a slow, elaborate, almost choreographed set of hand movements. He is still there. Tourists photograph him constantly. He is, in a small way, the most efficient piece of national messaging the country possesses, because he says the thing Bhutan once said. We looked at the modern option, and we decided we preferred a person. But something else is happening in Thimphu that is much harder to photograph. The city is full of young people who are leaving, not fleeing, applying, sitting in internet cafes and living rooms, working on student visa paperwork for Australia mostly, Perth, Melbourne, Brisbane. Teachers, nurses, civil servants, graduates. In the years since the pandemic, monthly departures from Paro Airport rose from a few hundred to more than 5,000. Roughly 1 in 10 Bhutanese now lives outside Bhutan. That number will come back. Hold on to it. Because in this same city, on a strip of flat ground beside the Wangchu River, there is an archery field where none of that appears to be happening at all, where men in goes are shooting at a plank of wood and singing at each other, exactly as their grandfathers did. Bhutan sent its first team to the Olympic Games in 1984 in Los Angeles. 6 athletes, all of them archers. The best finished 43rd. Hold on to that as well. An hour and a half east of Thimphu, over a pass strung with prayer flags, the road drops 2,000 meters into a valley that feels like a different country. Punakha is warm. Rice grows here. Bananas and oranges grow here. At 1,200 meters, with the high peaks holding the weather back, this valley was where the government of Bhutan spent every winter for 300 years because Thimphu was too cold to work in. At the point where two rivers meet, there is a building that is arguably the most important structure in the country. The Pho Chu comes down from the glaciers to the north. The Mo Chu comes down from the west. Bhutanese calls them the Father River and the Mother River. Where they join, on a spit of land between the two currents, stands Punakha Dzong, a fortress monastery 6 stories tall, whitewashed, red-banded, with a golden roof and a wooden cantilever bridge reaching across the water to its gate. It was built in 1637. It has been the setting for almost everything that matters in Bhutanese history since. And the man who built it arrived in this country as a refugee. In 1616, a 22-year-old monk walked south out of Tibet through the Ha Valley with a small retinue and a sacred relic wrapped in cloth. His name was Ngawang Namgyal. He was the abbot of Ralung Monastery, and he had a problem. Another man was claiming to be the same reincarnation he was, and that man had the backing of the dynasty that ruled central Tibet. Staying would have killed him. So he left, and he came here, into a patchwork of feuding valleys with no central government, no shared language, and no reason to obey a foreigner. Within 35 years, he had made all of it into one country. He did it partly by war. Tibetan forces invaded repeatedly, and he beat them back repeatedly, most famously in 1639, and again in the campaign remembered as the Battle of the Five Lamas in 1641, in which a coalition of rival sects and Tibetan divisions was broken outside the walls of Simtoka. But the war was the smaller half of it. The larger half was administration. He built the dzongs, fortress monasteries placed at the mouth of every major valley, each one holding a garrison, a monastic body, and the district's civil administration inside the same set of walls. He wrote the code of conduct, the Driglam Namja, which set out how a Bhutanese person should dress, eat, speak to officials, and behave in public. He standardized the festival calendar. He fixed the national dress. He created a dual system of government, splitting authority between a spiritual leader, the Je Khenpo, and a secular ruler, the Druk Desi. He died in 1651. His death was concealed for 54 years. The official position was that the Jabdrung had entered a strict meditative retreat and could not be disturbed. Food was carried in. Decisions continued to be issued in his name. Successive administrators governed a country on the authority of a man who was not there, and the arrangement held for more than half a century until it was finally acknowledged and the succession dealt with. It was not a lie told for its own sake. It was a lie told to prevent a civil war during the exact decades when the new state was most likely to fall apart. That instinct to control very carefully what the outside world is told and when did not die with him. The state he built held, more or less, for 256 years and 54 successive Druk Desis. Then it stopped holding. The second half of the 19th century in Bhutan was a period of open civil war between regional governors, and it ended in 1885 on a flat piece of ground beside a river in the Thimphu Valley. The governor of Trongsa won that fight. He was 24 years old. His name was Ugyen Wangchuk. 22 years later, the country made him something Bhutan had never had. December the 17th, 1907. Inside the courtyard of Punakha Dzong, representatives of the monastic body, the civil administration, and the people gather in the cold. There is no crown in the European sense. The raven crown, black and gold, sits on his head, its shape taken from a war helmet. A document is read out. It establishes a hereditary monarchy in a country that has never had one. And it is signed not with wax seals in the Western manner, but with signet rings and thumbprints, pressed one after another into the paper by every man in the room. By the end of the afternoon, Bhutan has a king. Punakha has been damaged many times since. Fire has taken it, earthquake has taken it, and on the 6th of October, 1994, something came down the Fo Chu that had been building for decades in a place almost nobody in the country had ever seen. A glacial lake called Luge Cho, high in the ice fields of Lunana, partially breached the wall of loose rock and debris holding it in. 10 million cubic meters of water went down the valley. It killed around 21 people, destroyed something close to 90 houses, and reached the fortress at the confluence with enough force to damage it. The lake that did that is still up there. So are the others. We will go and look at them. 2 hours east of Punakha, the road climbs again and then opens without warning into something the rest of Bhutan does not have. A wide, flat, treeless bowl of marsh grass and slow water, ringed by dark forest at 3,000 meters. The Phobjikha Valley is a glacial basin, and in late October it starts to fill with birds. The black-necked crane is a tall, pale, deliberate creature with a black head and a red crown, and it breeds on the Tibetan plateau. When winter closes in up there, several hundred of them come south over the Himalaya and land here. They stay until February. They feed on the dwarf bamboo rhizomes under the marsh and on what the farmers leave in the fields after harvest. The birds have been coming for as long as anyone can remember, and the valley has organized itself around them. When a crane arrives over Phobjikha, it circles the monastery at Gangte 3 times before landing. It does this on the way out in spring as well. The Bhutanese take this as a form of respect and return it. Which is where this stops being folklore and starts being infrastructure. For most of its modern history, Phobjikha had no mains electricity. When the grid finally reached the valley, the government did not string the cables between poles, because cranes fly low over open ground at dusk, and collision with power lines is one of the main killers of large birds worldwide. Instead, they buried it. Kilometers of electrical cable laid underground across a marsh at considerable expense in one of the poorest districts of a poor country, so that a few hundred birds would not fly into a wire. It would be easy to file that under charm. It is not charm. It is a country doing arithmetic and arriving at an answer that most countries do not arrive at. Bhutan's constitution requires that at least 60% of its land stay under forest cover permanently. The actual figure is above 70. It is one of the only countries on Earth that absorbs more carbon than it emits. None of that happened by accident either. East of Phobjikha, the road does something it has to do. It narrows onto a single shelf cut into a cliff, wraps around the head of a gorge, and passes directly beneath a fortress. Trongsa Dzong is long rather than tall, a cascade of white walls and courtyards spilling down a ridge above the Mangde Chu, with a watchtower above it on the slope. From the road below, it looks less like a building than like a wall the mountain grew. Its position is the entire point. For most of Bhutan's history, there was one practical route between the western valleys and the eastern ones, and it ran through this gorge. Not near it, through it. Under the dzong's walls, through its gates, out the other side. Traders passed through Trongsa, officials passed through Trongsa, armies passed through Trongsa or did not pass at all, which means that whoever held this building held the country's spine. The consequence of that is the reason Bhutan has the royal family it has. Jigme Namgyel, a nobleman from Bumtang, took control of Trongsa in the mid-19th century. His son inherited the post. His son was Ugyen Wangchuk, the governor, who came down out of this gorge, won the field at Changlimitang in 1885, and was crowned at Punakha in 1907. The dynasty did not begin in a palace. It began at a choke point. Bhutan has never forgotten this. To this day, the heir to the throne must first serve as Penlop of Trongsa before he can become king. The current monarch held the title. So did his father. It is not ceremonial in the way European equivalents are ceremonial. It is a deliberate, structural insistence that whoever rules this country must first go and stand in the place the country is narrowest. Beyond Trongsa, the land opens again, and something older begins. Bumtang is not one valley but four, lying side by side at around 2,600 meters, broad, cold, pastoral, full of buckwheat fields and cattle and the smell of wood smoke. There are more sacred sites packed into these four valleys than anywhere else in Bhutan, and many of them predate the country itself by 900 years. At Jambe Lakang, the temple in the fields is said to be one of 108 built in a single day in the 7th century by the Tibetan king Songtsen Gampo in order to pin down a demoness lying across the Himalaya. This one, the story goes, was driven into her left knee. A short walk away, at Kurje Lakang, there is a cave in the rock with a shape pressed into its back wall. Bhutanese pilgrims will tell you it is the body print of Guru Rinpoche, left there in the 8th century when he came to this valley to cure a local king of an illness that his own priests could not touch. The question this raises is a geographical one, and it is worth sitting with. Why is the deepest religious layer of Bhutan not in the capital, or on the border, or beside a great river, but here, in a set of cold agricultural valleys in the middle of the country, 4 hours from anywhere? The answer is that Bumtang was not the middle of anywhere when it mattered. It sat on the old trade and pilgrimage routes running down out of Tibet, and it was fertile enough to feed the people who used them. What looks now like remoteness was, for 1,000 years, a crossroads. The road came later, and the road went elsewhere, and Bumtang became quiet. Bhutan is full of places like this, somewhere that used to be central, holding the oldest things. Further east again, in the forests around Bomdaling, there is an insect that vanished for the better part of a century. Bhutanitis ludlowi, Ludlow's Bhutan swallowtail, is a large, dark, slow-flying butterfly with pale streaks across the forewing and long trailing tails behind, patterned in yellow, red, and blue. It was collected here in the 1930s by the British naturalist Frank Ludlow, described from those specimens, and then not seen again. For roughly 75 years, it existed only as dead examples in museum drawers. There was serious discussion about whether it still existed at all. Then, at the end of the 2000s, surveys in the forests of eastern Bhutan found it, alive, flying, in a narrow band of temperate woodland between about 2,000 and 3,000 meters, in an area of a few dozen square kilometers. It is Bhutan's only endemic butterfly. It is found nowhere else on the planet in a range small enough to walk across in a day, and it survived 75 years of being presumed gone because nobody had cut the forest it needed. That is what 70% forest cover buys, not a statistic, a specific animal still here. Keep going east, past Trashigang at the end of the road, up a track that until recently was a 2-day walk, and Bhutan changes ethnicity, language and dress in the space of a single climb. Merak and Sakteng are twin highland settlements above 3,000 meters, near the border with Arunachal Pradesh, and the 5,000 or 6,000 people who live in them are Brokpa, semi-nomadic yak herders whose oral history traces their arrival to a 14th century migration out of the Chona region of southern Tibet. They do not speak Dzongkha as a first language. They do not wear the go and the kira. The men wear a heavy red wool coat. The women, a red and white striped dress hung with amber, silver, and coral. Both wear the same extraordinary hat, a black cap of felted yak hair with several thick, twisted spouts hanging off it, which exist for one reason. Rain runs down the spouts and drips clear of the face. They live by transhumance, moving their herds up to summer pasture and down again, trading yak butter, cheese and wool to the lower villages for rice and maize. The valleys were closed to foreign visitors entirely until September 2010. And in 2003, the government of Bhutan created a wildlife sanctuary here. 740 square kilometers of temperate forest, snow leopard, and red panda country. The stated reason for its creation included the protection of the Migoi. The Migoi is the Yeti. A modern state, a legal instrument, a gazetted boundary, and a management plan drawn up in part to safeguard the habitat of a creature that has never been documented to exist. The Brokpa have told stories about it for generations. A tall figure seen through snow, cries carried across a valley at night, footprints appearing on a slope where no person had walked. Bhutan did not put those stories in a folklore archive. It put them in a land use designation, which is either absurd or it is the single clearest statement this country has ever made about what it believes is worth protecting. It may be both. In Bhutan, those are frequently not opposites. Now go north, as far north as the country goes. Above Gasa, past the last hot springs and the last farms, the trail climbs into a region called Lunana. 17 villages at around 4,200 meters, scattered across high valleys under the ice. Barley grows badly here. Yaks do most of the economic work. It takes about 7 days to walk in from the nearest road. The only alternative is a helicopter, and only when the weather allows it. The trekking route through this region is often called the hardest in the Himalaya, and in most years, fewer people complete it than reach the summit of Everest. Somewhere above those villages stands the highest mountain in Bhutan. Gangkar Puensum is 7,570 meters. Its name means roughly the white peak of the three spiritual brothers. It has never been climbed, not for want of trying. Bhutan opened its mountains to expeditions in 1983, and 4 attempts were made in the following years. Every one failed. The ridges are knife-edged, the slopes shed avalanches, and the jet stream comes across the summit at speeds that stop people where they stand. The mapping was so poor that one early expedition could not locate the mountain at all. Then, in 1994, Bhutan banned climbing above 6,000 meters. In 2003, it banned mountaineering entirely. The reason given was that the peaks are the homes of deities and should not be walked on. So the highest unclimbed mountain on Earth is not unclimbed because it is too hard. It is unclimbed because a country decided it should stay that way and wrote that decision into law. It will remain the highest unclimbed mountain on Earth for as long as that law stands. But the ice around it is not holding still. Bhutan's glaciers are retreating at somewhere between 30 and 60 meters per decade. As they pull back, meltwater collects behind walls of loose rock and debris left where the ice used to be, and those walls were never built to hold anything. That is what failed in 1994 and sent 10 million cubic meters of water down onto Punakha. Two of the lakes up there now are called Thorthormi and Rafstreng. They are separated by a thin ridge of unstable ground. If that ridge goes, the two lakes become one lake, and the flood that follows has been modeled at roughly 4 times the size of the 1994 event. Downstream of them sit the villages of Punakha and Wangdu Phodrang, 90 and 100 kilometers away. Also downstream sit the Punatsangchu hydropower projects, 1,200 megawatts and just over 1,000 megawatts respectively. Hydropower is Bhutan's largest export and one of the main sources of government revenue. The country sells electricity to India, and the water that generates it comes off exactly the ice that is now melting into the lakes that are getting bigger. The engineers know. Teams from the National Hydrology Center spend months up there every year measuring. In the 2000s, workers went up to Thorthormi with hand tools and spent 4 summers digging a channel to lower the water level by a few meters at 4,500 meters above sea level, because there was no way to get machinery in. They lowered it. It is still rising. And now the part of this country that gets left out of the brochures. The southern belt of Bhutan is not Himalayan at all. It is hot, humid, subtropical lowland running along the Indian border, and from the late 19th century onward, it was farmed by people of Nepali origin who came north to work the fertile land. They were welcomed. They cleared it, they grew rice on it, and by the second half of the 20th century, they had a name, Lhotshampa, the southern borderlanders, and they made up something close to 1 in 6 people in the kingdom. 1989. The government makes the Driglam Namja compulsory. The go and the kira, the northern dress, must be worn in public during business hours by everybody, including farmers in the southern heat who have never worn either. Nepali is removed as a language of instruction in southern schools and replaced with Dzongkha, a language most Lhotshampa children do not speak. Demonstrations spread across the southern districts. The participants are officially designated anti-nationals. Arrests follow. Amnesty International will later document more than 2,000 cases of torture. Very few of those detained are ever formally charged. Then the departures begin. Some at gunpoint, some under pressure, many after being made to sign documents stating that they were leaving voluntarily. By the end of 1992, there are more than 80,000 people in refugee camps in eastern Nepal. By 1996, the figure passes 100,000. Nepal did not give them citizenship. Bhutan did not take them back. They stayed in those camps, in bamboo huts, for the better part of 2 decades. From 2007, an international resettlement program moved more than 100,000 of them to 8 other countries. Around 84,000 went to the United States. The rest went to Australia, Canada, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. There are towns in Ohio and Pennsylvania today where the second language is Nepali because of what happened in the Bhutanese lowlands in 1991. The people who left were stripped of citizenship. That has never been reversed. In 2025, a small number of Lhotshampa deported from the United States were flown back toward the country they were born in and found that it still would not let them in. 1/6 of a population. There is no persistence story here. Nothing survived that shouldn't have. This is simply what the country did, and it did it during the reign of the king who gave the world the phrase, gross national happiness. Both of those are true. Neither cancels the other. Which brings us to the strangest building site in the Himalaya. At Galefu, on the southern plain near the Indian border, not far from the districts the Lhotshampa were driven out of, Bhutan is constructing a city. Galefu Mindfulness City is planned as a special administrative region with its own legal system, its own regulatory framework, and its own financial rules, covering around 1,000 square kilometers. That is a footprint roughly twice the size of Los Angeles, in a country of under 800,000 people. It has its own governor. It is designed around bridges, rivers, and terraced fields rather than blocks.
And it is being funded,
in part, with Bitcoin. Bhutan has been quietly mining cryptocurrency with surplus hydropower for years, and in late 2025, the government committed up to 10,000 of its coins, nearly $900 million, to build the place. It is worth naming what the outside world usually gets wrong at this point because the mistake is almost universal. Gross national happiness is not a mood. It was never a slogan about smiling. When the fourth king used the phrase to an Indian journalist in 1979, he was making a technical argument that a development index measuring only economic output would tell his government nothing about whether the country was becoming a worse place to live in. It became a formal measurement framework with domains and indicators and a national survey. The world heard it, decided Bhutan was a fairy tale, and printed that instead. Galefu is what the fairy tale looks like from the inside, under pressure. It exists because Bhutanese young people are leaving in numbers the country cannot absorb, and the government has concluded that no amount of cultural protection will hold them if there are no jobs. It is a bet that you can build somewhere modern enough to keep your children without becoming somewhere your children no longer recognize. Nobody knows yet whether that bet is winnable. There is one more valley worth standing in before the answer. Ha is in the far west, over the Chelila Pass, at 2,700 meters. Narrow, wooded, quiet, with a river through the bottom of it. It is the valley Ngawang Namgyal walked down in 1616 when he came into this country with nothing. It was closed to foreign visitors until 2002. The families farming it now are growing buckwheat and potatoes on terraces cut into ground their great-grandparents cut. In autumn, they lay chilies out to dry on the roofs, and the whole valley turns red from above, roof by roof, house by house. Nothing about that is preserved. Nobody is being paid to do it for an audience. It is simply what people here do in October, and they were doing it before there was a country called Bhutan, and they are still doing it in a decade when their children are filling out visa forms for Perth. That is the shape of the thing. Not a country frozen, a country that keeps choosing every generation at increasing cost. And in the forests and the high rock above those terraces, there is a coexistence that occurs almost nowhere else. Bhutan holds tigers. It also holds snow leopards. That is unremarkable on its own. Many countries hold one or the other. What is unusual is that in Bhutan, the two ranges meet. Camera traps and field surveys have recorded Bengal tigers at 4,000 meters in this country that is properly alpine, up among the blue sheep and the shale, hunting in ground that no tiger is supposed to be able to use. Snow leopards are working the same slopes above them. The two cats are separated by altitude rather than by distance, on a single, connected landscape running from subtropical jungle in the south to permanent ice in the north. The reason is not that Bhutan's cats are unusual. It is that Bhutan's forest is unbroken. Over half the country sits inside protected areas or the biological corridors that link them, and an animal can walk from the Indian border to the Tibetan snow line without ever crossing open ground. Almost every other country in the region has cut that ladder into pieces. Bhutan did not, and the result is a tiger standing in snow. Which brings us back down at last to a flat piece of ground beside a river in Thimphu. Changlimathang, the national archery ground. The country's biggest tournaments are held here. So are its coronations, its royal weddings, and its National Day. It is one of the highest sports grounds in the world, at around 2,300 meters, and on any given weekend, it holds men in ghost shooting at a plank. It is also a battlefield. This is the flat ground in the Thimphu Valley where the civil wars of 1882 to 1885 were decided. This is where the Penlop of Trongsa broke the Western coalition, established that there would be one authority in Bhutan rather than several, and set in motion everything that followed: the crown, the thumbprints on the paper at Punakha, the dynasty that still rules. Bhutan took the field where its monarchy was won and turned it into a place where men shoot arrows for fun. Watch a tournament there, and you will see the whole country compressed into a rectangle of grass. An archer steps up to the datse. He is holding a bow, some traditional bamboo, some modern compound, and which one is permitted depends on the tournament and is argued about constantly. 145 meters away, a group of men from both teams stands beside a wooden plank the size of a laptop screen. They are not protected. They are there because at that distance, the shooter needs eyes. The other team begins to sing. He draws. There is a moment of complete stillness in a place that has been noisy all day. He releases, and the arrow goes out over the grass on a long, flat arc, and nobody watching can follow it for the whole of its flight. Then, from down the field, the shout comes back. And if it has struck, the men on his own side form a line facing the target and break into a dance, a slow, stamping, formal dance with a song attached to it, performed on the spot in the middle of a sporting event. Somebody walks over and ties a colored sash into the archer's belt. Another one. He will wear them for the rest of the day, hanging from his waist, and everyone on that field will know at a glance exactly how his afternoon has gone. Cloth tied to a man to show what he is worth. Bhutan does this everywhere. In the dzongs, the scarf you wear across your shoulder tells the room your rank. White for a commoner, and a graded run of colors above that, ending in saffron, which only 2 men in the country may wear. The archery field is the only place where you can win one in an afternoon. Now, the part that is harder to talk about here. Bhutan has competed at every Summer Olympic Games since Los Angeles in 1984. It sent 6 archers to that first Games, and for the next 24 years, it sent archers and nothing else. No swimmers, no runners, no shooters. Archery was the entire national delegation, games after games. It has never won a medal, in any sport, ever. The best result from that 1984 team was 43rd. For most of the decades since, Bhutan's archers reached the games not by qualifying, but on universality invitations, the places the Olympic movement sets aside so that small nations are represented at all. The most archery-saturated country on the planet, where the sport is written into the calendar and the constitution of daily life, is by international measurement not good at archery. And the reason is not talent, it is that they are not doing the same thing. Olympic archery is 70 meters, at a target 122 centimeters across, in silence, with a recurve bow of standardized specification. Bhutanese archery is 145 meters, at a plank a fraction of that size, with a crowd singing about your face and a man standing next to the mark. One is a test of repeatable precision. The other is a test of holding your nerve inside a village. Bhutan is world-class at the second, and the world does not score it. Then, in 2019, a woman named Karma went to a qualifying tournament in Bangkok and did something no Bhutanese athlete had ever done. She won an Olympic quota place outright. Not an invitation, not a courtesy, a place earned on the score sheet, the first for her country in any sport in 35 years of trying. She went to Tokyo. She drew the world #1 in her first match and lost in straight sets, and she said afterward that simply qualifying had felt like a medal. Her coach was a South Korean archer named Young-Suk Park. Park competed at the Olympic Games in Los Angeles in 1984, the same games where 6 Bhutanese archers turned up, shot, and finished 43rd at best. It took 35 years, and it took the woman who was standing on the other side of that same field to get Bhutan its first place won on merit. On a river in central Bhutan, in the gravel and slow water below the road, there is a grey bird standing very still. The white-bellied heron is one of the rarest large birds in the world. Perhaps 50 or 60 mature individuals remain across its entire global range, and more than half of them are in Bhutan, along a handful of undammed river stretches. It stands over a meter tall. It hunts alone. It will not tolerate disturbance, which is the reason it has almost nothing left. Roughly 1 juvenile in 10 survives to adulthood in the wild. Bhutan monitors every known nest. It has adjusted infrastructure planning around the birds, which in a country that runs on hydropower means choosing, on specific rivers, not to build the thing that pays for the schools. The bird is not saved. Nobody involved pretends that it is. It is simply still here, this season, on this stretch of water, because a small number of people decided it was worth the cost of the water it is standing in. "400 years ago, a young monk walked into these valleys with a relic and no army, and by the time he died, he had made a country. His death was hidden for 54 years because the state he built was not yet strong enough to survive the news." Bhutan has been careful about what it tells the world ever since. It told the world about happiness. It did not tell the world about the southern districts in 1991 and the 100,000 people who are still not allowed home. And the thing that may finally change this country is not an invasion or a border or a flood coming down off the ice, though the flood is coming. It is a departures board at Paro. Nearly 1 in 10 Bhutanese now lives somewhere else. They are not being driven out. They are the ones the schools worked on, the teachers, the nurses, the graduates, and they are leaving because the arithmetic of a life is easier in Perth than in Thimphu. The government is building a city the size of 2 Los Angeleses to ask them to come back, and it is paying for it with Bitcoin, and it does not know if it will work. Somewhere north of all of it, Yangkar Puensum is still standing there, unclimbed. 7,500 meters of the most conspicuous, unfinished business in mountaineering, and the only reason nobody has stood on it is that a small country decided that some things are better left alone, and then held that line for 30 years while everyone else came and asked. That is the whole of Bhutan in one peak. Not a place that missed the modern world. A place that has been saying no to specific parts of it on purpose, at a price, for 4 centuries, and is now finding out whether saying no still works when the people leaving are your own. The arrows will keep going out over the grass at Changlimitang either way. The songs will be sung, the sashes will be tied, the men will keep standing beside the target. The question is, how many of them will still be in the country to shoot? Thank you for watching. Until the next journey.